Heavy Matters.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Legacy Chronicles. My name is Zachary Graulich. I'm the Assistant Director of Education here at HMTC, and today I am joined by a very special friend, Debbie Cohn, who is a second-generation survivor and someone who's very involved here at the museum. So first, thank you so much for being here today, Debbie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It really is my pleasure, and I would love to hear first and foremost about your parents and tell me a little bit about where they came from and kind of how they got here.
So my parents were from different countries. They did not know each other before this Holocaust. They met here in this country. But my father was born in Germany. And the interesting thing is his hometown was called Birkenau, which, actually means birch meadow or birch tree. And later, after this whole thing with the Holocaust, it became more of a thing because anytime my father would mention that he's from Birkenau, people would go, oh, because of the death wing of Auschwitz was Birkenau. Mm-hmm. So Birkenau was actually, my father's town was actually a beautiful village surrounded by mountains and beautiful forests and fresh air, and actually became a resort later on.
Wow.
So, that's the difference.
Yeah.
Big difference.
Absolutely. And your mother?
And my mother was from Vienna, Austria, a city of music, art, culture. And she always used to say, she couldn't believe in such a city of such music, culture, and everything, that it was like a world gone mad.
Absolutely. And how did they survive?
So my father's story is that he grew up in the whole time of Hitler coming to power. And my father was already like high school age when Hitler came into power in 1933. And so my father saw all the laws getting enacted. He witnessed everything, from that time. And felt it, the discrimination. And then everything got worse and worse for him until November 9th and 10th, 1938, Kristallnacht, when he was actually arrested and sent to Dachau concentration camp.
Wow.
And, that was a terrible thing. And he was arrested for his own protection. Mm-hmm. They would always say that kind of thing. They use euphemisms and all. And, of course, that wasn't true. And he was in Dachau, and it was a terrible time, but it was a very unusual circumstance with my father because Hitler had arrested all these Jews, had them all arrested because he called them the November Jews. And he wanted them to just leave the country, but they weren't leaving fast enough for him. Mm-hmm. And so he did that, but after he arrested all these people, he didn't know what to do with them. And my father, when he was in Dachau, had to do all these military drills all day long and march and march and march. And it was bitter cold. It was horrible. And people did get killed there, but it wasn't en masse at that time. But they released my father, which was a very unusual thing. And before they released him, he had frostbite on his hands because it was so cold. And they said, well, we don't want people to think we treated you poorly. So we're going to heal your frostbite first, and then we'll release you. And then they did release him, and they told him, but you have to tell people we treated you well, and you have to leave the country within 90 days, or else we'll get you back here and you won't get out. Right. Well, he could not leave within 90 days. It was very difficult. He had to work very hard, manual labor in brickyards and whatnot. Ultimately, he was the only one from his family to get papers from a relative in this country to come to the United States in 1940, which was extremely unusual.
Yeah, very late.
And so he came here and enlisted in our army and became a World War II veteran for the United States of America and was also a Holocaust survivor.
Wow.
So that's his story. My mother's story is quite different. She was much younger than my father when this all started. She was 12 years old and living in Vienna when the Nazis came into Vienna and annexed it, the Anschluss. And her life changed overnight, and things got very bad for the Jews also, until also Kristallnacht was a turning point for her family. They had to leave. First, her father's business was taken away before that, and all kinds of things were happening. But then after Kristallnacht, it was they really knew this is we got to get out of here. But they couldn't get out. My grandparents could not get out. They didn't have the right papers to leave. So they made a very difficult decision. And I always feel like it's the most difficult decision a parent would ever have to make, to send off their child to be saved when they knew they themselves could not be saved. So they put my mother on a train from Vienna through Germany into Holland at age 13, all by herself. This was not the kinder transport. That was actually something different, slightly different, because my mother's destination was Holland. That was where she was staying. And so she went on that train at age 13 all by herself. And when she said goodbye to her parents at the train station, that was the last time she ever saw them. So, and when she got to Holland, ultimately, things got bad there too once Hitler took over, all those other countries. And she ultimately had to go into hiding in Holland. And that was very, very difficult. And she was hidden for 3 years. Wow. 3 years.
Wow. So did you always know growing up that you were the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors? Or do you remember a day or a time in your life when you first found out?
I always knew. I'm the youngest of 4 children. And by the time I came along, my parents were talking about it, mostly my mother. My father always was much more hesitant about talking. My mother was pretty vocal about it from when I was very, very young. I remember learning these things and hearing these stories, of course, not realizing that it was that unusual.
Yeah.
Most of my friends, all of my friends didn't have the same experience at all. And it definitely was a big part of my life, and it still is to this day.
Absolutely. I mean, you've been involved here at the museum for over 20 years at this point. So tell me a little bit about how you got involved in Holocaust education and specifically here at HMTC.
That's a very good question. My mother and father used to speak all over to schools, all over even the country and even the world. Believe me, my mother spoke in her town of Vienna to her middle school at one point, and my father spoke to his gymnasium, they called it, like that was the high school. He spoke there in Birkenau, Germany, and it's quite unusual.
Yeah.
So they spoke all the time, and I always felt like it was their domain. That's for them to do. What do I have to do with this? But my mother helped curate an exhibit on hidden children. When I was living in Rockland County, New York, my mother used to have we called them hidden children. Of course, they were already in their 70s at that point, but we always referred to them as hidden children. And they were other people like my mother who had been hidden in various places. And they used to come to my house. And there was a lot of them. And that was also unusual to have all these people in my living room talking about, and actually a lot of them wouldn't talk about their experience. But once they did open up, they realized how helpful it was to them. So after they started talking about all their experiences to each other, they realized we have to tell the world. So my mother did a great thing, and she said, we have to make an exhibit and let people know our stories. So she helped make this exhibit. It was a big deal. And it had 17 stories in this exhibit, all different stories. Some were hidden in sewers, some were in forests, some in convents, some like my mother in homes or whatever. And it profiled those stories. So my mother said to me, and it used to travel around the country, this exhibit. So my mother said to me one day, Debbie, she wasn't living in Long Island, but I was. And she said to me, Debbie, we have to get this exhibit to Long Island. I said, okay, you handle that. So she ended up speaking to the education director at the time, who was Dr. Regina White. And I will always remember her because she said, yes, we will take your exhibit. And so the exhibit came here, and my mother spoke at the opening of the exhibit. Of course, she told her story and whatever. But because she didn't live very close by, she was over an hour and a half away, I knew it was important for me to get involved. And I wanted to connect those pictures with a person and a story. And so I started learning how to do my parents' stories. I never knew before that, because I always heard this little anecdote and that little thing and this survival story, but I never knew from start to finish how to do it. So I was very fortunate that my parents were alive for me to ask them. And they were very willing to do it. They wanted to do it. And my father was a big historian. He knew so much about the history. And they were a wealth of information. So I interviewed them. I did many, many hours of research, really. And I finally came to the presentation, and that has changed even. I now have a PowerPoint. And another thing that I do in my presentation that I feel is so valuable is I knew that once my parents were no longer with us, I still needed to hear from them. So actually, I didn't do it with my father, but my mother, I interviewed her with video, and we have clips of my mother in my PowerPoint. So even to this day, when I do these programs, I feel like she's doing it with me.
And what must that experience at the time, what was that like for you to go through that journey alongside your parents? And what is it like for you now, as you say, they're no longer with us, but you still feel like you're doing it with your mom? So what is that like for you?
I know that they would be so happy that I'm doing this, because you have to remember these stories. Why go through all of this suffering and then have it all forgotten? I feel like it's a dishonor to my grandparents and to all the survivors, it's not the survivors, the victims and the survivors, to forget about it. It's a total dishonor. And so my parents would be very, very happy that I'm doing that. And they knew I was doing it, actually, because they were still alive when I started doing it.
Yeah, and when you first started it, what was that journey like for you? Because you really, as you said, you knew bits and pieces, but you really were starting to put it all together, and you had them as resources. I'm sure that must have brought you closer to them in a way.
Absolutely. We definitely bonded over the Holocaust, which sounds like a unusual thing.
Yeah.
But we did. And my father was so proud. I remember when I was here one time, and I was talking about Germany, and I said it's a land of, they were telling people it was a land of work and bread, Arbeit and Brot. And my father heard me say this, and he was beaming. He said, she knows, she got it, that I knew the history, at least some of it. And he was thrilled that I was doing it. My mother as well. They were both so happy. And I was thrilled because I said, wow, it's really explaining a lot of things for me.
Yeah.
What my mother did go through on that train ride, and what happened after that, and all of this. And it made me understand them better, definitely understand them better.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for you, as someone who's now been doing this for, as I said, over 20 years, I'm sure you've seen a lot of change in the Holocaust education world, and a lot of developments and things that you've maybe had to adapt to. So speak a little bit about that, if you can, as to how maybe for you specifically, giving testimony has changed over the years.
Well, first of all, this podcast idea is totally new. And I never even knew you were doing this until I was asked to do this. And I think it's phenomenal. I think it's wonderful because people can see you. They don't have to come here to see you do this. And I think it's great. How has it changed? I mean, like I said, first of all, the museum has changed. I mean, a lot.
Yeah.
We had a huge donation from Claire Friedlander at the time, a Holocaust survivor who made it possible partly to make this a real museum, which is amazing. I recommend everybody come here. And so that has changed so much, and it's made it so much easier to give tours. I give tours as well. I used to give tours all the time. But I always feel like one thing has remained the same, and that is telling the stories. That is totally the way to teach the Holocaust, in my opinion. People need to hear those stories because they want to grab onto, how did that person get through this? How would I get through this? And if you tell them, these stories, it makes them really relate better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that definitely is the constant in this whole thing.
It's really, as we say, adding kind of the humanity to the Holocaust, because we talk about numbers and statistics and survivors and victims, and it's so difficult for, I think, young people to grasp when you say over 6 million Jews were murdered. Well, I don't even know what they think of when they hear 6 million. That's such a strange. I mean, even for us as adults, trying to understand and visualize 6 million people is nearly impossible for us to do. So it's so critical that you add the humanity. You give a name and a face and a story just to one survivor that can maybe in some way represent all the other survivors as well as some of the victims. So I'd love to hear in your words, why do you feel that carrying the torch forward as you do for your parents is so important?
Well, I said before, number one, I feel like I have to honor my grandparents. They died a brutal death. And all the millions who were murdered and died of other things during that time. And the survivors who made it through. I want to carry on this legacy. It's so important to try to stop hate from happening and bullying. I had a student once say to me, wow, I never really we learned a lot about bullying, but I never put the two and two together, Holocaust and bullying. And I said, yeah, that's how it started, with little bullying acts. And people went along with it. And it just mushroomed and got bigger and bigger and bigger and turned into murder. So they go, oh, like a light bulb went off, and certainly in that student.
Yeah.
So I try to have people not hopefully worry about another Holocaust, which, we hope not, but just to carry in their everyday lives, that they see something happening that they know isn't right, and they try to stick up for that person, or even take some friends with you to help stick up for that person. That's what I try to do. I mean, just to make people conscious of it, put it into their consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of answered my next question a little bit already, but I was prepared to ask you, has there been really any experience that you've had, whether it be here at the museum or when you've gone out to a school or a session you might have done on Zoom, as you do also speak virtually to different audiences? Has there really ever been a time that stood out to you, whether it be a specific audience that you just felt so lucky to be able to speak to, or like you said, a question or a comment from somebody that to this day stands out to you? Is there any other experience you can think of?
I brought some of these letters because I thought this would be summing it up, kind of. After I would speak to students, either here or in person, in the schools, I would get lots and lots of letters. And I actually looked at some of these letters, and I'm just going to read you just a couple excerpts. Dear Mrs. Cohn, you taught me so much about the Holocaust and awakened me. It's so easy to forget how lucky we are. The story about your mother was very inspirational and made my heart jump. She was so brave to do something like that, and at such a young age, too. Here's another one. I learned so much. These are 6th graders, by the way. I learned so much through what you shared about stories of your mother's hard times. I really enjoyed hearing about the stories, even though they were disturbing and devastating. One of the things I learned from you is to never take for granted what you have, because overnight things can change, just like they did for your mother. But the sad thing is that even though that period of horror is in the past, hatred still exists in today's society. And just one more. Thank you for sharing your family's story about surviving the Holocaust. Being able to talk to so many people about what happened to your mom and dad takes a lot of courage. Based on your mom's story, I guess that courage and bravery runs in your family. So I thought that was very funny. And that brings me to one episode I had here recently, just last month.
Oh, wow.
I was speaking to a group here, also probably 6th graders. And I, of course, do my whole program, and I tell them my whole parent story, but mostly my mother. And I wasn't quite sure if I was connected to the students. I didn't feel, sometimes I could feel the connection.
Right.
But at the very end, this little girl who's in the front row, like the students start leaving, she comes right up to me and she gives me a big hug. And she said, "You're so brave and so strong." I was like, wow. I said, I never think of myself as a strong one. Yeah. I'm always thinking of my parents, you know? And so I just thought, wow, I guess I reached her in some way, Yeah. So that was very special.
Yeah. So when you have an experience like that, or you receive these remarkable letters, I have to imagine that's pretty, just, it kind of validates everything that you're trying to do and everything you've been doing for over 20 years now.
Well, it feeds me,
Yeah, it keeps you going.
I mean, actually, every time I walk into the doors of this place, I feel like I'm at home. I really do.
Yeah.
And of course, there are pictures of my mother in the museum, so that helps. But that's not the only reason. It's because you're doing incredible work here. And just the fact that you ask me and people like me on these podcasts shows how you value us.
Absolutely.
And let me tell you, that means a lot. It means a lot.
Listen, it's our pleasure, and I personally feel that it's the least we can do for people like you who bear your heart and soul every time you come in here and speak to students and adults sometimes, to really put yourself in this place of vulnerability because you feel that it's the right thing to do and you feel that you have this calling to do that. I feel that asking you to do this is the least we can do.
I mean, I just think it's wonderful that you're doing this. You're reaching a lot of people this way. And I was going to tell you about who else in my family does any Holocaust education. Mainly my sister, Evelyn Loeb Garfinkel. She has always also done Holocaust education like I do. But she lives in Albany, outside of Albany, New York. And so we never really do it together, but she does her own thing. And I wanted to share with you an artifact that we both have to use when we talk to students. And this is it. She has one ice skate and I have the other. And the reason we have these ice skates is because they're my mother's ice skates. And when my mother was going into hiding, she needed people to help her. And one of them was this man who was not Jewish, who she told him before she went into hiding, can you hold some of my belongings for me, including her ice skates?
Yeah.
And also a stack of letters from my mother. My mother, when she was already in Holland, her parents were still in Vienna before they were picked up by the Nazis. And her mother had been corresponding with her by letter because, of course, there was no cell phones or anything like that, or computers. So she would handwrite her letters. And one day the letters stopped. And my mother assumes that's when they were picked up and sent to camps. So my mother had the stack of letters from her mother, and she gave it to this man also for safekeeping before she went to hiding. So after her 3 years of hiding, she came back to this man. She says, do you have my things? He says, well, I have your ice skates. Here they are. But I'm so sorry. I was too afraid to keep your mother's letters. I had to burn them. And so, of course, she was very devastated because at that point her parents were no longer alive. They had been murdered. And she wished she had had those letters, but she couldn't blame the man for fearing for himself.
Yeah. I mean, you have to understand, of course, the position that someone like him was in. I mean, it's hard. We talk about the roles that people played, you know, the upstanders, the bystanders, the collaborators. And, you know, we try to do our best, I think, to look at every situation during the Holocaust from all those different perspectives, the good and the bad. And in that case, I feel that gentleman did what he felt he could do.
I mean,
saved the ice
I say
skates.
this is her only memento from her childhood.
Yeah.
But I want to mention one more thing about my sister. She's so active now that she, for the last several years, has been part of a group in the capital region in Albany, helping to create a Holocaust memorial, a New York State Holocaust memorial, which is pretty incredible.
That is.
And so she's a big part of that. And it's just passed some legislature, and it still needs one more thing, but hopefully it's going to get rolling. They have a whole plan for the architecture. And she's also going to be helping to run the education component. Amazing. So maybe I think you've heard from them already in some way, but I think we both feel how important it is that this history cannot be forgotten. And unfortunately, I feel like it already is. And I know that not all states mandate Holocaust education in this country, and it's shocking to me. And even the ones that do, we don't know how much they're actually teaching the students. And you know, we give as much as we can. I mean, we have these teacher institutes here where you train the teachers how to teach the Holocaust, but that's only one place. And unfortunately, people think the Holocaust is exaggerated or whatnot. People don't even know what it was. And it's so shocking to me as a person who lived with it my entire life that this is happening. Yeah. And that's why I'm saying that we can't stop this. We can't stop doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on all fronts. And as we wrap up here, I would love for you to, maybe we can end on a bit more of a positive note. I'd love to hear I'd love to hear from you kind of what your message would be if you have any sort of, you know, kind of public service announcement, if you will, to the next generation, to anyone who's listening of any generation. What would your message be?
I mean, I would love it to be a perfect world where we had no conflict. Wouldn't that be nice? But unfortunately, when there is conflict and there is somebody doing something to another person or a group of people, please try to do something about it. Don't just be silent. Just try to help out in some way, even if it's just to help call somebody else to help out. Because we all know it's not easy. You know, we've all been bystanders in our lives at one point or another. It's a common thing. But just to try to think to yourself, you see somebody treating somebody badly, even a social thing. You know, I'm not talking about a major event, and try to stick up for that person. So that's one of the things. And just don't forget this history. Please don't forget it, and learn it the right way.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Debbie. I really appreciate everything that you have done and continue to do for HMTC. I appreciate you and your wisdom and having you on the podcast today. It's really been
appreciate what
remarkable.
You do too.
Thank you. And to everyone who's listening, thank you so much. As always, we really appreciate your support always. And for more information on us and the work that we do, as well as to view our other podcasts, please go to hmtcli.org.